So this week I took a look at the Royal Society of Chemistry periodic table of the elements, and honestly there's a lot of cool stuff in here. So a little bit about the site itself. So there's a bunch of tabs at the front homepage of the site. I'm looking at them now. There's a history tab, alchemy, podcast you can listen to, video, and then a trends bar. I'll talk a little bit about them in more detail in a second, but I think one of the things that I found really, really cool about this website is there's such a wide variety of interdisciplinary applications for this in a chemistry classroom, which I'll be focusing on in this video. I think that a lot of times we talk about, subjects, obviously, math and science kind of go hand in hand. We talk about those hard sciences in the context of each other. But we don't really ever mesh the humanities or even perhaps social sciences, economics in with chemistry, and I think this site has a lot of capabilities to prompt students to ask those kinds of questions about how do these things, how are they intertwined? So I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the cool things on this site, at least some things that really stuck out to me. Obviously you can look up the general physical, chemical properties of the elements here, which is all fine and well, but I don't think that that's deserving to be the primary focus of this talk, because there's just so much more out there that this site has to offer. For one thing, let's start with the videos. So there's a little video, usually it could be anywhere between 3 and 10 minutes, where you can just kind of, there's scientists, chemists from the University of Nottingham, who are, they do a bunch of demonstrations, they talk a lot about the elements, so you get to see those demonstrations in action, even if perhaps a school can't afford those materials for those demonstrations, you can still kind of see that element at work in action, reacting with other compounds, producing cool colors, cool products, all that jazz. And I think that can still be a very useful tool, right? Obviously it's kind of difficult to students don't get to hands-on touch and feel every single element out there. Schools simply can't afford that kind of stuff, at least most of them can't. So just getting to see them at work in action in those videos is pretty cool. And so another thing that really struck me, I think this was a super cool part for me, was under the history tab. If you click on that, there is tons and tons of information about what some of its properties have been throughout history and what people have used these things for. Another cool sorry, this is just so neat. There's another function on this website where you can click through years ranging from 1 AD to currently 2017 AD, and each time you increase the year, it'll show you when exactly each element was discovered formally. And so that can be, I think, a very useful tool in a history class, perhaps, talking about, perhaps what causes, what events were going on at that time that led to the discovery of that element. Maybe it was just a happy accident. Maybe they were trying to do something else and accidentally discovered this element instead. Or it's possible that they, you could also talk about how did this element did this element perhaps cause a lot of changes in world events? Like, for instance, uranium, obviously, we know that was used in the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. How is uranium shaped kind of nuclear warfare and just warfare in general, and, people's general feelings of safety? So that could be a really useful tool in a history class, as just one example. Other super cool things about this site that I noticed, it gives you the top 3 producers of each element, which can say a lot. There's also one thing I found really interesting. It lists the political stability of the top producer of that element. For instance, I was looking at cobalt, and I noticed that the top producer of cobalt is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and that holds roughly 67% of the world's reserves of cobalt. And so, that could also raise an interesting question in economics class, perhaps, or political science. Because Democratic Republic of Congo, I was looking on the indices, you've got, that's like the 7th or 8th least politically stable country in the world out of 190 something countries. So, what were to happen if, they just, what if we just couldn't have access to cobalt anymore? How might that change world economies? How might that change the face of certain industries? Would certain industries go under? Perhaps. If the Democratic Republic of the Congo were to go just completely awry. So that's another interesting, I think, study, economic applications of chemistry. I think that's something that's not talked about too much, but I think that's a pretty cool study in economics, and that could also, be an interesting discussion in political science. How might certain elements change the political climate of a country? What if they're fighting over two countries are fighting over some precious resource? How does the value of this shape both inter-country political climates and also within the country? I don't know. There's a lot there. There's a lot more I think I could talk about. The last point I wanted to mention was also there's the alchemy tab, which I think could also be a very useful exploration into both the links to, between chemistry and medicine. Obviously alchemy itself is a little outdated, but I think it was a very interesting means of exploring certain medicinal properties of elements. And it also has very strong ties to early religions and how certain religions were formed. And again, I don't know too much about that, but still, I think it's just an interesting idea to explore how chemistry could be possibly incorporated into a religious studies classroom. So just summary of this whole video. I think this tool is great. I think there's a lot of interdisciplinary contexts that you can apply the Royal Society of Chemistry periodic table to, and I would love to use this in my future classroom. I think this could be very helpful to give students a lot of interdisciplinary context as to the elements they're learning, and vice versa in other classes, give them a chemical context to what they're learning. So, awesome tool. Sorry the video is a little long, please don't deduct points. Bye!